Right, what we're going to do tonight, we're going to discuss the life and death of Joe Meek. Now, it's one heck of a strange story, and as far as I'm aware, he's always been off everybody's sort of paranormal radar. Now, to make life a little bit easy for everybody, because I'm one that when I attend the webinars, I sit there with a notepad, write down, and go out later researching. So what I've actually done, produced a 10-page document, which I've asked Yinska, who's on the webinar tonight, to pop it in the chat, so you can either download directly the document, or you should be able to download it, I think, off the chat via the PDF document. Now, initially, the talk's going to have a very heavily musical feel to it. At some point, you might be thinking, when was this guy going to start to talk about paranormal? But what I've got to try and do with you, because when people look at Joe Meek, they go back to 1967 and base their opinion around that brief period of the final days of his life. There's a lot more to Joe Meek, of this complex character. So what I need to do is take on a journey to the initial days when he was a teenager, how he progressed, the individual of Joe Meek, as well as his musical genius, and some of the things I'll share with you tonight. Some of them you will never hear before, so I will try to make it as interesting as possible for you, as well as his paranormal and his occult interests. So initially, I need to take you on this journey. So those that are not musically minded or have no interest, you might find, well, you know, it's not really your cup of tea, but I need to instill that into you. So at the end, you're in a position that hopefully you can form your own opinion. There's also a couple of questions I will be asking ASAP, because this is the first time that I run this webinar with ASAP, and you guys will have some information for me which will be of interest. Hopefully you will anyway. The actual slides as well, some of them will contain audio, some of them the first time they've actually been played in the public domain. Again, the document will have links to those. So anything like the audio, the visual documentation, some of the statements that have been provided are all in that document. So I'm going to make it life really, really easy for you, so you won't need to make any notes as such. So the first question is, who was Joe Meek? From a musical perspective, he was a legendary record producer. He's undoubtedly Britain's first fully independent record producer, and probably in the world as well. And that's taken the idea of the initial scripting of the song all the way through to the engineering, the recording, and the cutting of the disc. No one had done that before. He couldn't write music, play any instrument of any description, and he certainly couldn't sing in pitch or key. He had an unusual way of getting his ideas into music, which we'll cover a little bit later. He had 21 charted hits from 1954 to 1966, 5 number ones, including Telstar that CJ played at the beginning, that was simultaneously went to number 1 in the UK and the USA. That's the first record ever to do that. And he's a paranormal investigator from at least 1950, maybe as early as 1946. And he's not been on anybody's paranormal radar, hopefully till now, unless you're going to tell me otherwise. So music and occult, they've always gone together. You only have to look at the splattering of rock bands we have. There've always been associations. And a lot of people used to always think it's like marketing exercises than anything else than that. Musicians are, and Loz Buckley, I know she's an ex-musician herself with some standing, will probably agree with this. Musicians tend to be temperamental by nature anyway. So if you get into conflict, you never know if they're going to break into tears and go sobbing by your feet, or stab you in the eye with a drumstick. And I've encountered both of them. With it comes strange rituals and superstitions, always goes hand in hand with the music world. And I've been fortunate enough to be involved with it quite a number of years. The top picture, the top left of the picture, some of you may recognize this. The guy in the center of this crossroads in Mississippi, and it's a guy called Robert Johnson, looked upon as like the forefather of the modern blues riffs, really. Now, Robert Johnson, he was born in 1910, and he was able to cement his own legend into his own story by declaring that he'd gone to these famous crossroads in Mississippi and done his legendary deal with the devil. And around that time, musicians that knew him found it quite strange that the week before he was an harmonica player, and the week after he was suddenly a fantastic songwriter, guitarist, and he put it down to this deal that he did with the devil. Now, in the 1980s, those of you that are into watching any sort of occult films, not really occult films, more music, there's a film called Crossroads, which was loosely based on the Robert Johnson story. Robert Johnson actually wrote a song called Crossroads, been covered by various musicians over the years, including Eric Clapton. And the Crossroads film stars two Americans. One's a young American guitarist who meets this elderly harmonica playing blues player, who then discovers that he's done a deal with the devil. And the only way they can win this contract back from the devil himself is this epic guitar duel that takes place with the devil's chosen musician, what happens to be the guitarist Steve Vai. Won't spoil any further, but if you need any sort of background to the Crossroads story, Robert Johnson, the Crossroads film is loosely based on it, does cover some of the cult nature of the music world around that period. Now, Robert Johnson himself died in 1938 at age of that magic year, the Club 27, the fabled 27th year, where multiple artists and musicians have died over the years. Robert Johnson was one of them first ones that joined that club. There were a couple of the films as well, which have linked onto the document for you. The other is The Pick of Destiny, Tenacious D with Jack Black, which covers all the occult and ritual side of music. And that really is more of a comedy. And the other one, of course, is the fable Spinal Tap. If you're into comedy and music, well worth watching Spinal Tap. And with Spinal Tap, they have three drummers, that magic number of three, including one that's spontaneously combusted. Very funny. So if you're into that sort of film, well worth watching. There are links in the document. The centre picture top is the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club, the album cover. The darkest member of the Beatles was, in fact, John Lennon, of all people. He's far from, love and light. And myth and legend suggests that John Lennon, at midnight, just before the Beatles become world famous, tripped off to the famous bridge in Liverpool called the Devil's Bridge and did his deal with the devil, where he's given a supposedly 20 years. And the reason why I've chosen this cover is on the top left of the Sgt. Pepper, where it's a ringed in circle, is Aleister Crowley, of all people, that they've had placed on the album cover. So the top right is Led Zeppelin, certainly the darkest of the major rock bands. All albums are covered in strange satanic and strange symbols, unusual poetry. The lead guitarist from Led Zeppelin is a guy called Jimmy Page. He's a self-confessed season ticket holder of the Golden Dawn, and did in fact purchase Aleister Crowley's property on the banks of Loch Ness in Scotland, which he kept for about 3 decades. That later on, that was tried to be purchased back from Jimmy Page by the guitarist Ritchie Blackmore. And Ritchie Blackmore himself plays a role in the Joe Meek story as well as Jimmy Page does. So Led Zeppelin itself is quite, if you look at it from a symbolic point, their most famous track is The Stairway to Heaven. I think everybody, if you're into rock music at all, will have known Stairway to Heaven. And if you look at that from a lyric point of view, because we have an old English proverb, don't we, in this country, sticks and stones may break our bones, but words will never hurt us. Well, that's okay up to a point, but in music, it can have an old different meaning. So with Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven, the opening lyrics are, the lady who's sure all that glitters that's gold, and she's buying a stairway to heaven. So if you look at from a Christian perspective, you would suggest that that's quite light. It's talking about purgatory, the old indulgence or scam of paying the church endless amounts of money to spend less time in purgatory before you take the steps to heaven. But as the music goes on, it then talks about, as she's on the steps, she looks to the west. And from a Christian, you wouldn't be looking to the west, you'd be looking to the east. And there's various references to the May Queen, who comes out in April to do the housekeeping. Then in May, she's looking for a human sacrifice, and references to the Piper. So Led Zeppelin itself, very much occult based. Bottom left is Judas Priest, not really associated with anything dark, but they were subjected to 2 lawsuits, American lawsuits, when 2 unfortunate young men took their own lives based on a song from a Judas Priest album. Very sad, but it just shows you the power of words. The centre one is, of course, Black Sabbath, needs no introduction. Ozzy Osbourne calls himself the Prince of Darkness. And I suppose we would probably think that he's had some divine intervention to keep alive as long as he has done. The amount of drugs and alcohol he's pushed into his veins. And the bottom right is, of course, Iron Maiden, Number of the Beast, 666. One of the few albums I've actually bought 2 of. Excuse me. Iron Maiden, very much on the white side of the occult, always doing battle with evil. But that didn't stop the American purists buying all the albums out of the shops, have a sacrificial burn one night, until some bright spark says, well, if we're burning the albums, we're inhaling Satan's fumes. So what we'll do, we'll smash them up with hammers. Iron Maiden won't be that bothered. They're purchasing the albums, and what they do with it is up to them, because at the end of the day, just make the album more popular. So the occult and music always been in hand, all the way through back to Robert Johnson in 1910, upwards to the current day. CJ mentioned some months ago that the reason why he came into the paranormal was because of the loss of a loved one. My own journey started in the mid-1980s when, because the job I was doing at the time, sometimes wasn't even in this country, long periods of time on my own, unable to socialise. So I started turning attention to recording for the first time. So I purchased myself a 4-track, and very quickly I began to, what I'd say, record strange stuff. I think the interpretation is probably quite valid now as it was then. I couldn't understand what it was that I was recording. There's nothing that really jumped out at me. For example, if a recording the bass guitar one night, then on playback I hear a voice saying, "Hello, Tony, I'm Pete the Poltergeist, I've come to haunt you." That would have given me a bit of a clue, but I didn't have that. And when I spoke to others, at least half of them would say, yeah, we've experienced the same sort of phenomena. And when we moved on to the digital, from the 4 tracks onto digital, I've still got I'm quite old school when it comes to electronics. I've still got a 32-track hard disk recorder. It's still there. I still record this strange stuff. And of course, there are genuine reasons for that, the rational reasons. Top left are radio transmissions, top right, TB radio, as well as taxis, used to cause issues, baby alarms, the bottom left, and the actual 4-track recorders themselves, where because you use a magnetic tape going over recording heads, the heads would get magnetized, possibly could get in some degree of crosstalk in there, but it never really gave me a full explanation. So I took it a bit further, wanted to start to research, and I very quickly discovered that there hadn't been a long history of electronic voice phenomena. The earliest account that I could find was, I think I'm going to pronounce his name correctly, Attila von Sly. In 1956, he started to report that he was beginning to get more successful when he turned to reel tape recorders. Konstantin Rautiv, he didn't really research EVP till around 1964. And later with his book, which I've still got with the record, of Breakthrough. That was my first research book that I ever actually purchased. And I certainly in the 80s didn't understand what it was I was recording. And if Joe Meek, who was recording from his teenage years, if he'd encountered electronic voice phenomena, and some of the information I'm going to share with you tonight strongly suggests that he did, he would not be able to explain it or find a rational reason for it. So back to Joe Meek. He was born in 1929, 5th of April, and he was born to a family of farmers. After the Second World War, his parents started to purchase numerous businesses, and they were major poultry farmers, as well as they grew vegetables, as well as having the greengrocers. So really, Joe had a younger brother, Arthur, and an older brother, Eric, as well as a sister. So his father and the parents just wanted the best for the kids, purchased the businesses, and Joe Meek's career was already stage 4, and it would be farming. His family remember fondly that at age 11, he wanted a Christmas book called Practical Wireless. This is just before the Second World War broke out. And I remember him repairing, as well as building various devices in the garden shed, including tape recorders, which was no easy feat back then. After he finished school, working on the farm, he then took up his national service, as people were doing back then, where he joined the RAF, working with radio and radar. The first significant event in Joe Meek's life is when his father passed away in 1950. And I think this gave Joe Meek the confidence then to just branch out, move away from the farming influences into something that he wanted to actually do, which was music. So his first job was actually with Currys Electronics. Then very early 1950s, and he left there to join Midlands Electricity Board as a TV engineer. TV was now beginning to come into the, not into all households, but certainly it was on the run up. And that's when he was building multiple tape recorders. Certainly when I tracked his life back to around that period of early 1950s, 51, 52, he was actually using tape recorders to take music from the radio, go out to music venues with a large PAs, playing back his set list that he'd recorded on the radio. So he could quite possibly have been UK's first mobile DJ. And certainly the evidence sort of suggests that. He was also around that time, and his brothers have emphasised this, that he would simply go out anywhere and simply record effects. He'd record absolutely anything. And one of the things he did early on for the enjoyment of friends and family was he started to record his horror stories. In a way, I suppose you'd call them talking books. So he'd have sound effects on tape 1, his story that he'd spoken on tape 2, and play them back and record the effects on the sound. A very sort of primitive way of overdubbing, really. And the reason why I was using multiple tape recorders is because of the sheer cost of a Studio 4-track, which is around about £21,000. And it's my suspicion now that it's around this time when he started with multiple recording that he would have experienced EVP, because half the people I've spoken to that have done recording have done exactly that. So his brother, both brothers are still alive. Remember fondly that he would have them get recording anything for him, helping him. He'd get up at the early hours, record birds, anything that was making a sound. Eric would hold the microphones up to walls. He would, doors creaking, brothers' cars screeching around corners, just smashing glasses. So what he was actually doing, although he may not have realised it, he was cutting his teeth into how to record. And his standout traits, personality-wise, were he was highly secretive at an early age, he had very few friends, and he confided in absolutely no one. Often went to abandoned places to record, often referred to as shy and not manly. Joe Meek is unquestionably gay. So over the next few years, he just really continued to record anything and everything, including on one occasion, his neighbours talking about other neighbours. and playing it back to them. I'm quite sure neighbour disputes meant a whole lot of difference in that household. Then in 1953, his big major feat really was to cut his own record from a tape. He'd actually learned to do this when he was with the RAF during his national service, which is no mean feat back then. However, Joe Meek was very much independent from early on, but so working for Midlands Electricity Board, not a great lover of being told what to do. He was also constantly late. His workmates back then referred to him, they often coming in 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. And when they started to ask him what he's been doing, what equipment he was using, deeply evasive, didn't like talking about what he was doing. He then left the MEB to join Broadmeads. Then in 1954, he started to record local dance bands. Very evasive when he began. Anyone asked him about his equipment. And the one that came to light in 1954, mainly because the police got involved with this, shows exactly what the personality of Joe Meek was. It's when 2 disc jockeys turned up. He had what they call a residency where you book maybe for the next 12 months to do every Saturday night, for example, at a venue. The last thing you want is anyone encroaching on your ground. This ended up with Joe Meek not being over happy with this one, and they ended up fighting on the vicar's lawn and the police got involved. So he's already showing his territorial sort of aggression towards anybody that was how he saw was stealing his ideas, and had no problems with violence whatsoever. And given his nature, when I've looked at his school record, you would have thought someone that wasn't a manly and feminine in his approach would have been ripe for some form of bullying, but it's actually quite the opposite. He was very capable, Joe Meek, of looking after himself, and there's nothing to suggest that his family, when he was being brought up, his teenage years, was nothing major jumped out to say there was a problem there, and that's what caused his the way that he was as a person later on in life. Just a normal upbringing, really. Anyone that's done live recording is the most problematic one. It's a lot easier these days because you can just go along to a live set, plug into the mixing desk, throw a couple of microphones to the audience, maybe, and maybe a couple of microphones on the stage to pick up the back line. But it's quite straightforward today. Back then, with multiple instruments, it was not easy. So again, he's evolving and transforming himself, cutting his own teeth, really, how to record different sort of environments. Now, this is my own opinion, this, although many will agree. Because Joe Meek was working in an industry that was corrupt from day one, and it still is, and it's always been that way. And if you look at it from a modern perspective, you know, if I went out and recorded my own music and it ends up on Spotify, I receive just 12% of any royalties from a deal I've never signed up to, and it's still that way. I use this as an example because it's one that's around at this point where the deal from the Spotify and YouTube is 50%. I think my own personal opinion should be the opposite. It should be 88% to the artist that owns the royalties and 12% to them. And I always say to anybody that's new coming into music, if you want the truth, ask the roadie, never the agent or the manager. And I don't think I'm being unfair with that opinion, because at the end of the day, if you're easy bullied and you're naive, you're not going to last 5 minutes in the music world. But if you're street savvy, which Joe Meek certainly was, and you're aware of that, you will survive. And Joe Meek did survive. Quick look at the music industry, because it's still in the mid 1950s. Rock and roll was just a couple of years away. The big 2 superstars in the UK were Tommy Steele and Lonnie Donegan. And the music then, Music Gem, it was predominantly jazz. You had your big bands. This is Lonnie Donegan with skiffle. A lot of them say it's the Tommy Steele was like the first rock and roller. Well, there's a big difference between someone like Rock and Roll on the Clock from Bill Haley and Lonnie Donegan's My Old Man's a Dustman. The 2 music gems are quite different. And I'm quite sure you'll agree that music evolves about every 10 years anyway. So by 1956, 57, skiffle craze was coming to an end, then being taken over, then by rock and roll. Then in the 70s, we have the glam rock and so on and so forth. Music always evolves by every generation or so, every decade or so. And if we go back to 1950s, although the war in Europe ended in 1945, had another 8 or 9 months of the Pacific, rationing didn't really end in the UK till about 1954, with some stuff still rationed up to 1957. And if we ever recollect to our younger days, we always reflect of our teenage years of age 10 to 16. They always say they're the greatest times of your life. Well, Joe Meek was to age 10 at the outbreak of the Second World War. So his teenage, the times he should have been enjoying himself, was engrossed with the Blitz of London, because that's where he was brought up. The mainstream radio broadcast at that point, such as the BBC, have always dictated what you could listen to. They were self-imposed censors of the time, and certainly had the monopoly for broadcasting right up to about 1970, 1971. And if you're a young adult now, coming out of the Second World War, you just wanted change. You wanted to move away from that time. And if you wanted to listen to rock and roll, everyone turned to, and I certainly turned to it in the 70s, because I'm a 60s child, was Radio Luxembourg, Radio Caroline. Nothing to do with McKendrick. I was a great lover of Radio Caroline, Radio Luxembourg, but others would have preferred Radio Caroline. And I'm quite sure many of us on the podcast tonight, the webinar tonight, will remember coming up from school, having your tea, doing your homework, off to bed, Radio Caroline, writing out the numbers. For the first time, it probably wouldn't be able to be available in the shops the next 3, 4, maybe 5 weeks. Golden Earrings, Radar Love, Silver Machine, Heartwind, that type of number. Radio Luxembourg actually started broadcasting for the first time in 1930. It goes back that far. And Radio Caroline came in the 1960s. So from anyone like myself, my parents, my father was a country western guy, and I detest country western. My mother, her favourite singers were Mario Lanza and Paul Robeson. I have no interest in that. So the only stuff that I could actually listen to was radio, and pirate radio was the place with my preferred media. Then thankfully the Americans arrived. Bill Haley, 1955, with Rock and Roll Around the Clock. Elvis Presley, although he never came to Britain, certainly was known about in 1957, and the great Buddy Holly in 1958. All these artists were known about for at least 16, maybe 2 years before, due to pirate radio, before they finally end up on the mainstream radio. And your music studios back then, because I'm going to take you on a journey into what the music world was like. It's very mainstream. There were people in white coats. They did things a certain way. Now, with Joe Meek, working now with outside broadcasting companies, he had his own ideas with music production. He was certainly the first music engineer to ever use compression and limiting as an actual effect, where normally with compression and limiting, it's used to address a problem. Joe Meek himself used it as an effect, which had never been done before. And they are obviously they're going to dislike Joe Meek's experimental approach to music production. They wanted it this way. The last thing they wanted is someone like Joe Meek spending next to 2 or 3 hours on a record. They wanted it recorded and out the other end as quickly as possible. And records in the 50s could literally be in the shops within 24 hours. It was done that quickly. And the problem of his own makings with Joe Meek is he could very quickly gather enemies, because he wasn't for telling anybody how he was able to record the way that he did. And the other problem is that the time he took with the recording, and his big problem was artists came to the young studio specifically asking for Joe Meek to record for them. That is always going to cause animosity within the studio. and the reason why he was flipping from studio to studio, sometimes two studios in a single year. And the big jump really for Joe Meek that really put him on the map finally was the left-hand one is Frankie Vaughan, The Green Door. Many of you remember the Shakin' Stevens version came out about 1980, 1981. Just a different chord sequence and tempo, and it's recycled as a rock and roll hit. 20, 30 years before, it was recorded by Frankie Vaughan. Compared to other recordings that were done back then, and these were done on 78 speed records, was absolutely awesome. That then ended up with Anne Shelton specifically asking for Joe Meek to record what would become a #1 hit, which was Lay Down Your Arms and Surrender to Mine. Anne Shelton herself was only probably second to the great Dame Vera Lynn, as we remember from the Second World War, the Force's sweetheart. So with Lay Down Your Arms and Surrender to Mine, what he was actually doing was capturing the country's moment, the way the country was feeling at that time. Second World War was ended, rationing was coming to the end. The country was trying to pick itself back up again from a second World War. Most of our grandparents, if not grandparents, would have lived through 2 world wars. So you can understand why the country was looking for change. So Lay Down Your Arms absolutely flew to #1. Very similar to what happened in 1914 with the First World War, when the Welsh songwriter Ivor Vanello brought out a song called Keep the Home Fires Burning. And coincidentally, Yinska, who's on the podcast tonight, her husband Jan recorded a later version, more modern version, just last year of that Keep the Home Fires Burning. Yinska may want to just pop the link up for anybody to listen to. So music can get recycled. Now we Lay Down Your Arms. It was a similar sort of marching number to Keep the Home Fires Burning. But the problem is getting the marching sound. So the idea was to go to a local barracks, record troops marching, and then bring it back to the studio. Joe Meek said, no, I've done this before. I've got a better idea. So what he arrived in the studio with was literally a wooden tray full of rocks, and he basically just shook the rocks. And the link that I put on the document, which covers the track of Lay Down Your Arms, what sounds like people marching is in fact rocks in a tray. And this is the genius of Joe Meek, how he could look at sound and think, well, this is what I want it to sound. And I've got a few examples of that for you tonight, because sound's not always what you think it is. Because I think we've all done investigating. We deal with audio all the time. Sound is not always sometimes what you think it is. I also want to mention this guy at this point. Joe Meek is often been referred to as the British answer to the American Phil Spector. Phil Spector was famous for his wall of sound. And back then, Phil Spector was the United States' best studio engineer. Likewise with Britain, Joe Meek himself was Britain's best. Now with Phil Spector and Joe Meek, they've never met, but in a modern day perspective, we'll probably say they had each other on fast dial, because he certainly plays a role in Joe Meek's life, and we'll be covering that later. So I want to just drop Phil Spector in at this point. Now with that, Annie Shelton's Lay Down Your Arms going to #1, and staying in the top 40 for 14 weeks, Joe Meek was a man in demand. And the problem with Joe Meek, he was trying to do things outside his office work as well as in the studio. That he was often working at 18 hours a day. Studio engineers were after his knowledge of compression and limited, as I mentioned before. And he was also using another effect called delay, often referred to as echo and reverberation. But he's not for telling anybody. He's just a closed shop, doesn't say anything. So with that's so rampant, it's really only just a matter of time before we start to become fully independent. he's also quite always through his life, he's always been a little bit paranoid about people, what he thought was stealing his ideas. And I'll just read this statement that was written by Lonnie Donegan back in 1956. The record buying public in the 1950s were mostly adults. Joe Meek targeted 14 to 20-year-olds with pop music he knew who his listening audience were. This had never been done before. So knowingly or unknowingly, Joe Meek was quite cute when it comes down to marketing. Whether specifically, because up to that point, everyone's aiming for the over 20s because they're predominantly what the people bought records. Now, hopefully, you've taken all that in. Let me just check what I'm like for time. I've got to try and keep this to 90 minutes. Oh, yeah, I'm okay. We're now into the paranormal side, and this is when the story starts to get quite strange. Joe Meek had enough of IBC, so he's leaving. A like-minded studio engineer by the name of Dennis Preston decides in 1956 he's going to open his own studio called Lansdowne. Now, with Lansdowne, every good studio has its own session bands. Back then, the artists, whoever you were, walked into the studio provided the session band, the recording studio, everything. It's just they walked in, recorded, walked out, the studio looked and sorted out everything else. What Joe Meek was cute in doing is, rather than having just a simple session band, he actually named them. And in this case, the Lansdowne, the session band were called Jimmy Miller and the Barbecues. Jimmy Miller would later go on to work with the Rolling Stones. So Joe Meek had written a couple of numbers for the Barbecues which had been released. In a way, having two bites at the same cherry, really. Now, Dennis Preston said, this is the first indication I've come across where I know Joe Meek was involved as a spiritualist, because he admitted to Dennis Preston that he was attending seances on a regular basis, but with limited success. Now, I'm not sure how you define limited success. So if you go to a seance and expect a big demonic gremlin jump on the table and it doesn't happen, I suppose that's limited success. I'm not too sure what he means by that, but we do know that he was certainly attending seances. And added to this is Jimmy Miller of the Barbecues was a Ouija board lad. He was using this all the time, mostly to impress his girlfriends. Now, those of you who attended the ASAP podcast, I think last December with Alan Murdy on the history of the Ouija board, Alan rightfully points out that up to about the 1960s, mid-60s, the Ouija board just seen as a parlor game, wasn't seen to be anything like dark. So we're still around 1956 here. So Jimmy Miller is simply just using the Ouija board to impress his girlfriends, just as a bit of a parlor game. And this is what happened. Let me just, that's it. So Jimmy Miller, he was still around up to a couple of years ago, said he was playing the Ouija, but mostly just to impress his girlfriend. So Joe Meek approaches him and says, can I come along with you? Not a problem at all. So one night, such a large group, which included Joe Meek, gathered for such a session, using a Bible and a large mortise key. Now, the picture on the bottom left there, I've been told it's only the key that was used was between 6 and 10 inches long. That's just like a Google one that I pulled off. Took the mortise key, and that was laid down on a certain passage within the Bible. The Bible was then shut and it's tied up tightly with some form of cord. The participants then rested the fingers on this handle bit here. And then somebody read the passage aloud. Now, what the people said happened was, as this passage began to get read out, the handle began to vibrate. So the natural instinct of all the people that were there, including a high number of females, removed their hands from it. The Bible remained static, yet the key itself began to turn, with such force it began to tear the pieces of the Bible away from them. And the repercussions of this, he frightened everyone to death. Jimmy Miller, together with all the people from the studio, legged it from the room, and never to go near a Ouija board again. And this same board was then gifted to Joe Meek. Now, I've looked into this, and Joe Meek appeared to be the only one not really bothered by the experience. And now he seemed to be continuing, and would tell Dennis Preston that he was continuing Ouija board sessions on his own. Tried to coach Jimmy Miller back in, he refused point blank. I'm not getting involved with that again. And he stuck by his word as well. But some questions remain, because one of the things I've never been able to understand is that Jimmy Miller himself says he just used it in a standard way as a Ouija board gets used. The other people present that night, including the girls, had no prior involvement in the occult except using this Ouija board in past sessions without a problem. So my question is, who came up with the Bible and Mortis key idea, placing the key on an unknown Bible passage, which was also written down to read after the Bible had been tied shut? Who came up with the idea to then place fingers on the handle? And there's only two conclusions I could draw from this. It's either a complete fluke experiment, or someone has some premeditated knowledge. And given it's known who was there, there's only one person who stands out, and this is Joe Meek. He's the only one that seemed to not to be bothered. And even Jimmy Miller has no recollection of who dreamt up this strange experiment. So my first question I've got for you guys is, have you ever heard of this procedure before? Because I certainly haven't come across it. One for chat for later. Okay, this is the most well-known event involving Joe Meek, which is the myth and legend of the Buddy Holly premonition. So what I'll do, I'll quickly read the stuff that you normally find on the internet, including Wikipedia. Myth and legend suggests on the 3rd of February 1958, Buddy Holly would die in a plane crash. There are three reasons given for the premonition. One was a seance, one was tarot, and one was a dream. Joe Meek is supposedly told Buddy Holly backstage at one of his UK tour gigs. Joe Meek sent a telegram to Buddy Holly warning him, and the other is Buddy Holly confirmed the premonition during a radio interview on his return to the USA. Now, for those of you that are not aware of of Buddy Holly, is if you look at it from in a sort of a modern perspective, he would be, of all people to mention, there's only one that springs to mind for some reason, is Justin Bieber. That's the sort of fame that Buddy Holly took around with him. So, and he was certainly American rock and roll golden boy. What we can dispute is false, is that Joe Meek could not have verbally have told Buddy Holly in advance about the 3rd of February premonition of 58, because his UK tour in the UK didn't start to the 1st of March. And I've also found, after a bit of research, on the February the 20th, Buddy Holly was still in the United States in Florida doing a number of gigs. So Buddy Holly wasn't even in the UK till late 1958. So Joe Meek could not have told him verbally of the 3rd of February 1958 because he was still alive. So it couldn't have happened that way. However, when he arrived in the 1st of March, Buddy Holly actually did 50 gigs over 28 days. 28 days in this tour bus. I can't imagine Lady Gaga wanting to do that. 50 gigs. Sometimes it was 2-3 gigs per day. Major successful, and that was his first feat on British soil. So what we know is true is that Joe Meek did meet Buddy Holly during his 58 tour, which would be in the March of 58. But if he did warn him, it was about the date and not the year. because on the return to the USA in April 1958, American radio interviewed Buddy Holly on at least 2 occasions where Buddy actually says, "We thought at first we might not be going. A well-known British recording engineer told me I would die in February, I think in a plane crash. But it's April and I'm very much alive. There was no malice and the information was given to me with good intent from a concerned fan." However, Buddy Holly would have in fact died in a plane crash on the 3rd of February, but in 1959. Now, what I have been able to do is to get a little bit more information. Now, when Buddy Holly did die, the headlines of the day was, and this is something like you just remember because I'll come back to this shortly, the day the music died. That was the headlines of the day. And in 1970-71, Don McLean brought out his big hit, American Pie, which was based really on the Buddy Holly being killed, together with Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin had also died as well. So what did in fact happen with the premonition of we unravel the myth and the legend? In early 1958, Joe Meek had asked Jimmy Miller to come along to a tarot session. Jimmy Miller insists that it could not be a Ouija board session. He didn't want to go near one again. Joe Meek agreed to that, not a problem. Also invited along to this tarot session was a guy by the name of Ford, an Arab. That's about as much as I can find out about him. He doesn't seem to have been involved with the studio. People just say he was just a mate of Joe Meek, but he was definitely an Arab. So, but that's as much as we know. And they're the three. Now, what happened now, if you think the Bible was strange, this gets even stranger. So, and what I'm actually going to do, I'm actually going to read the actual statement. And again, with the document that have obviously, hopefully, Ian's is going to link in the chat. I'll put this word for word in there. So you don't have to write anything down. It's all there for you. So let me read this through back to you in Jimmy Miller's own words. In 1958, with the end of the skiffle craze on the cards, I was back in the studio with Joe Meek, but this time without the barbecues. Instead, session musicians would be used for the latest recording, Jelly Baby. I was the only one that agreed with Joe on a new direction for the band, although Jelly Baby flopped. Joe coaxed me back to the seance table. This would be mid-January 1958, and we were joined by another friend of Joe's named Ford. This was the first time I had ever handled tarot cards, and even now I'm getting tingles down my spine as I recall the events. This is the first time I'd handled tarot cards. They felt strange. I felt nauseated, but somehow I was being pulled into something from which I could do nothing except continue to slowly turn the cards. It was like I was outside of myself looking in on the group, and sounds became non-existent. Halfway through the pile of cards, I started to grip Joe's so hard my fingernails broke the flesh on the underside of Joe's knuckles. And Ford was caught up with whatever happened and wrote down a date of February the 3rd, followed by the name Buddy Holly and the word dies. After all the cards were turned, Joe let out a yell as he now felt the pain in his fingers. And when he read the message on the pad, he paled visibly and let out another yellow. The whole affair is amazing because the message written in what looked very much like my handwriting. Strange one. Any interest Joe had in Buddy Holly through his music was now redoubled with his anxiety to obviously his message gave him. There were only a couple of weeks left in which to warn Buddy Holly of the February danger, and he lost no time in advising the relevant record companies and publishers to do so, something Joe Meek could have done without question. Be that it may, February the 3rd passed without a sound, and a few weeks later, Holly and his group arrived in England for a month's tour. The prediction Joe felt was just as valid as ever, and at one of the London venues, he made a point of meeting him, emotionally explaining what had happened and delivering the handwritten message. but someone had confronted by an excited stranger warning him of his impending doom, Holly displayed admirable calm, accepting the note and thanking him for his concern. So this seance, tarot seance, whatever they call it, it seemed to be similar to seance, but using cards and some form of automatic writing. And the idea was totally Joe Meek's. Joe Meek controlled the session, and he was a guy in the middle. Jimmy Miller was using his left hand to turn over the cards, Ford using his right hand to write. And my second question for you guys, I'm sorry, what on earth were they doing there? I've never come across something like that. So any pointers you've got, I will be all ears on that one. So let me just have a quick drink. So we're still in the end of 1958. Joe Meek was given a pay rise, taking his annual salary. It lands down to about £1,000 a year, plus 5% of the profits. 5% of the profits was considerable. The UK average salary around about that time is about £120 per year. And Joe Meek was also gifted a new Sunbeam rapier. Standout personality traits for Joe Meek at this point, very similar as before. Trusted no one, highly secretive, and even taped up his homemade secret echo box so no one could look inside. And I've spoken to the guy who actually held that and shook it while Joe Meek wasn't looking, and he said it rattled. That's about as much as we know about it. Had no close friends of any description, just really colleagues. 3rd of February 1959 comes the news, sad news that Buddy Holly had in fact been killed in an air crash together with the Big Bopper and Richie Valens. Going back to the premonition, the plane crash was never mentioned in it, just date 3rd, the month February, Buddy Holly by name, followed by the word die. So I'm pretty confident that the air crash is a myth and legend, just been added later when Buddy Holly did in fact die. Joe Meek was obviously visibly shaken. Now, what Jimmy Miller said was that some months after, as well as recalling the premonition, he spoke about a recurring nightmare, which also ended with piles of dirty clothing being pushed into a box, cupboard, or possible car boot. And this was later explained when Joe Meek read a newspaper report following the inquest, which said that the reason they got on the aircraft in the first place was to get their dirty shirts laundered. I'm not disputing that Joe Meek had nightmares. What I do question that Joe Meek only found out about it following the inquest, because within 48 hours of Buddy Holly, this is the major star of the day, getting killed together with Richie Valens and the Big Bopper, questions were asked. And within a very short period of time, people knew that the pilot wasn't licensed to fly the aircraft at night in poor weather using radar. And not all the ones involved with Buddy Holly were killed. They had to really just basically draw lots. Some Buddy Holly booked the aircraft and they drew, just flipped a coin or whatever, and decided he was going to go onto the aircraft, and where the rest of them had to go spend the 3 days to get to point B on the coach. That's the reason why Buddy Holly got in the aircraft in the first place, to quicken up and gain a couple of days. And people being interviewed back then, that didn't get on the aircraft, said they took army clothes because we wanted to get them clean. So I do question this one regarding to the you had to wait for the inquest, because that information was certainly known well beforehand. And I'll go back to the American Pie lyrics. It was written. American Pie itself, it was actually done, American Pie Part 1 and Part 2 was actually double, 8.5 minutes long. No radio station on the planet is going to play a record that's 8.5 minutes. So the shortened version, the 4-minute one, we've done as Part 1. Now, the song itself, American Pie, doesn't just reference the death of Buddy Holly, which is again as I mentioned on the newspaper clipping, the day the music died, it references Janis Joplin as well as Jimi Hendrix. But if I was to look at this in the context of the Buddy Holly premonition, let me read this back to you. And this is all one lyric, it's part of the lyric. It's not, I haven't sort of sampled bits of it, it's just one lyric. "'Cause fire is the devil's only friend. Oh, as I watched him on the stage, my hands were clenched in fists of rage. No angel born in hell could break that Satan's spell. And as the flames climb high into the night to light the sacrificial rite, I saw Satan laughing with delight the day the music died." So if I look at them lyrics in the context of Joe Meek and the premonition, it's quite it's intriguing. I'll say nothing more than that. You'll have your own thoughts on that one, which we can chat about at the end. Now, by the end of 1959, Joe Meek was taking a slimming tablet called Preludin. And Patrick Pink, who will come to later, who was his long-standing personal assistant, Patrick Pink, he was a guy that went out to get it for him. So he's certainly on it as early as 1959. And it gave him a few hours of nervous anxiety, followed by a couple of hours of lows. He had approximately around about £3,000 in his bank account at that point. In a day's money, probably about £50,000-60,000. Then in November 1959, Joe Meek was dismissed from Lansdowne Studios for being impossible to work with and having a split personality. And now it was time to go for Joe Meek to go completely alone. So on the 25th of February 1960, Joe Meek announced to the world the forming of Triumph Records, which is a bit of a joint venture. By May, he released 8 singles, but by June 1960, just 4 months later, Joe Meek simply walked away. Now, what I've quickly done, just make sure I've not flipped too many pages. No, I'm okay with that. Is because of John Meek's demise, they're suggesting that he was some sort of crackhead. He was certainly taking Preludin. So what I've actually done, I've done a little bit of research on that, which I want to share with you tonight. It was an over-the-counter drug. Simply go to chemist, just buy it, and it was used as an appetite suppressant. Joe Meek was very paranoid about the weight he was gaining and just wanted to suppress his appetite. It was classified as a narcotic in Sweden in 1959, taken completely off the market by 1965, and it began to get smuggled in initially from Germany, later Spain and Italy. It was tablet form initially, then later they started to bring in the raw powder. Then eventually amphetamine became the dominant stimulant for most of the musicians back then, and it was more easily available. Taken by the Beatles early in their career, Paul McCartney was certainly a user of Preludin, together with Paul McCartney, who used to take 4 or 5, where Paul McCartney said they took about 1, John Lennon took 4, maybe sometimes 5, and their drugs their involvement with drugs first occurred starting in Hamburg in Germany. Jack Ruby was said to be said himself he was on Preludin at the time he killed Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald was the guy that killed President Kennedy. Jack Ruby, in turn, then assassinated Lee Harvey Oswald. So after the demise of Triumph, when he walked away, he then ends up at 304 Holloway Road, London. It was a studio. This shop here, it's Leathers, run by Violet Shenton. There's actually 2 further floors. This is the first floor and there's a floor above it. And they're the 2 floors that Joe Meek took over. It was completely financed by a guy called Major Wilfred Banks. He wanted to control the financial side of the business totally, where Joe Meek would have 100% control of the studio. And up to the point when, before his demise, Joe Meek never showed any sort of interest on the monetary side. He was more interested in the fame rather than the actual fortune. And this is Major Banks on the left there. And RGM, as it was called, using John Meek's birth name, Robert George Meek, it was incorporated on the 14th of September 1960, with major banks and George Meek both having 50-50 shares between them. Major Banks was a shrewd operator, very good with money, financially sound. He would keep John Meek on the straight and narrow. He was also a regimental guy, session musicians that turned into Holloway Road would have to stand up straight, dress smartly, proper, typical sort of Fawlty Towers sort of major. Then shortly after, a dodgy deal comes to light. I still think this had some involvement with Banks himself, because what normally happened is when an artist came to the studio, they signed the rights to the studio. With Triumph Records, for the 4 months that John Meek was involved with it, he actually got the artist to sign the rights to himself, which is incredibly unusual. So when he left Triumph to join RGM and try and find out about this deal, they were not happy with it at all, but it's absolutely nothing legally they could do. But Major Banks gave him a £1,300 golden handshake just to keep him quiet. And that suggests to me that the whole idea around this was down to Major Banks rather than Joe Meek himself. And this is really the first time that a UK record producer has actually leased out master tapes. And I think they did that really just to generate instant cash. One of the numbers, a guy that will come to shortly, was a number called Tell Laura I Love You. Tell Laura I Love Her. It was sung by the Beatles actor at the time called Johnny Layton. That number, Tell Laura I Love You, that was brought out in the American with Richie Valens sung that and went to number 1. And this is the thing with music back then. You could have multiple artists recording the same particular number. And living and working in 304 Holloway Road, not the tidiest. I was actually going to say this is CJ's bedroom, but he's tidied his bedroom up now, so I can't say that anymore. Spoiled me joke there. And this is what it was like when it come down to the studio, completely disorganized. So, and now they now need to get some musicians in. Every studio back then had their own session musicians. We're still getting towards the end of the 90s, around about 1960. The artists such as Cliff Richard would just simply walk into studio. They supplied the session musicians. Cliff Richard was one of the few first ones to break away from that trend by going out and sourcing his own band. Initially called the Drifters, later to become the Shadows. But up to that point, most artists simply walked into the studio, using session musicians, which is exactly what Joe Meek was sourcing. So what it actually did with this was that he got the session band together and he called them the Outlaws. He'd released a couple of hits with the Outlaws, guitar instrumentals, but now he needed to evolve it, because as far as guitar instrumentals back in late 50s, the Shadows had got that sewn up. And the Americans had the Ventures, their American guitar instrumental band. So what he was going to move into was into what he called then organ music, which we would probably refer to as keyboard or electronic of the 1970s and 1980s. And the guy that he chose for the sort of the organ numbers that he was going to record was this guy called Jeff Goddard. Joe Meek initially wanted him to be the frontman, and the reason why he gave him the name Anton Hollywood. But Jeff Goddard was not going to be a frontman, and very quickly they dropped that idea. But what Jeff Goddard did possess was incredible songwriting and lyric skills. Now, Jeff Goddard himself was a spiritualist before he even met Joe Meek. And both of them were attending weekly or bi-weekly seances together. Some people suggested that it was Jeff Goddard that got Joe Meek into the spiritualism. Joe Meek was into spiritualism at least 10 years before he even met him. So it just happened to be did he choose him because he was a spiritualist or because he was a very good musician? Probably the latter, to be honest. Artists had tasted life at Holloway Road. These are people who come and went to the studio. David Bowie, Tom Jones, Ray Davies of the Kinks, Billy Fury, Gene Vincent, Georgie fame, Jeff Beck, Mark Bolan of T-Rex fame, Rod Stewart, Jimmy Page, Led Zeppelin, Johnny Layton the actor, Richie Blackmore, Chas Hodges, Midge Mitchell of Jimi Hendrix. These are the ones that I know you probably would have recognised. There's literally hundreds of others as well. So as far as if you were an up-and-coming artist, the place to go was Holloway Road. And a quick word on this guy, and you're going to have your first audio to listen to next. So many of you will recognise Chas Hodges from his days of Chas and Dave. But there's a lot more to Chas Hodges than round the piano, honky-tonk piano, singing Rabbit, Rabbit. He was a multi-instrumentalist, good, he could read music and he could write music. And he was also Joe Meek's chosen ally when it came down to putting his ideas onto paper. Because Joe Meek's unusual way of getting his ideas onto paper is either he would hum you the number, or he would have pre-recorded it on a tape, because it was a bit of a night talk, Joe Meek, and then play it back to Chas. And Chas's job then was to go out, work out the music, the chords and so on, and bring it back for the session bands to play later. So what you're going to hear now is one such recording. CJ undoubtedly will recognise the number, but this was the first stage of what would become a multi-million pound, million selling single. Those on headphones, just be ready, just in case it's a bit loud, okay? But this is what Chas Hodges had to work with.
Tony, there's no sound.
You okay?
There's no sound on that. I don't know if you can replay it. Can you?
Is it not Is it not playing?
No, it didn't.
No. Can we go back? And what you need to do is at the bottom, Tony, where it says share screen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hang on. Let me work this out. I need to work out how to do this now. Advanced sharing. No, it's not. We couldn't hear it at all. That was the problem.
Ah, okay.
Hang on. Listen,
I'm glad it's happened now, because there's others that are going to follow.
Yeah. We go to share screen.
Yeah.
Somewhere there's an option that allows you to share sound, and I'm trying to find it. I think if you click under more on the right hand corner.
Yeah, I found it. Share sound.
Brilliant. Try that.
Okay.
That's it.
You got it?
Got it.
Was that okay?
Yeah, that was fine. Thank you.
Oh, right. Okay. Right. It's fine. Okay. I'll just play a couple of seconds of it. Okay. Right, you've heard that. That's what poor Chas Hodges had to work with. How he transcribed it into what he did is staggering. I've had a few musicians that have strange ways of getting their ideas, but that's exactly how Joe Meek got his music together. I want to bring this guy into it now. This is a guy called Larry Pounds. He was a manager for both Tommy Steele and Billy Fury, and they shared the same band, the Outlaws. So during the day, the day job, the Outlaws were Joe Meek's backing band, and during the night, they were Billy Fury's backing band. Larry Pounds was flamboyantly gay, where Joe Meek was more of a closet gay. And in principle, they should be best friends, but they absolutely detested each other. And the problem is with Joe Meek could not take a wind up. Larry Parnes knew exactly how to get underneath Joe's skin and took delight when he's doing so. And particularly when you're sharing the same band, bands will go back into. No one loves a wind up more than me. And Larry Parnes knew exactly how to wind up Joe Meek, as we'll come to shortly. Right, okay. The number one hit arrives. It's highlighted as another number one hit, but this is the first one as a fully independent. The number is called Johnny Remember Me, and it was written by and penned in by Jeff Goddard, fully engineered by Joe Meek, and is sung by John Layton, the guy I mentioned before, with Tell Laura I Love You. The BBC banned the record due to the word died that was in it, and it was later overdubbed with the word lost. I've actually got hold of the original one, which I'm going to play both of them too, so you can actually see what actually happened here with it. The following year, John Layton, that sung Johnny Remember Me, went on to I think with everyone seen The Great Escape, the Hollywood War blockbuster. He was in that. He also had a follow-up hit called Wild Wind, which also reached number 2 a few months later. And what Jeff Goddard said was he would continue his weekly spiritual meetings in the hope of becoming a medium. Now, we know a lot about this particular track because he was on the front page of Psychic News, of all places. Jeff Goddard, attending the seances and spiritual meetings, suggested that this song called Johnny Remember Me, the song itself is about a guy that's girlfriend had died the year before. And he was saying that he got the idea from Buddy Holly spirit himself, because Buddy Holly had died. So how much is marketing, how much is truth, is anybody's guess. Jeff Goddard's no longer with us now, but he stuck to his story throughout his life, that he genuinely got the idea from Buddy Holly. So that's Johnny Layton there with the great Steve McQueen. Now, this is where the magic touch from Joe Meek comes into play. Now, effects back then in the 50s and 60s were pretty non-existent, really. And what Joe Meek was after doing is he's got a male vocalist telling the story about the girl that's died, and he wants a haunting female voice in there as well. How can he achieve it? And he actually achieved it by using a 12-foot metal pipe. Some have suggested it was a drain pipe, probably robbed off his neighbours, knowing Joe Meek. And for what he's done is he's got the female to record the vocals. One end of the pipe, he's got the speaker. The other end of it, he's got a microphone. And the sound's going back, the sound's gone bouncing down the metal pipe. It's already reverberating anyway. And then it hits the plates, which is inserted, backs up, moves on, backs up. And what you actually get is a shimmering sound. When you hear it, it sounds quite haunting. Now, what you're going to hear now is the actual release version of Johnny Remember Me, only about 30 seconds. If you listen carefully, what I'll actually do, I'll put my thumb up. I do apologise. What I'll do, I'll put my thumb up when the overdub takes place, and you can just about hear it. The audio's in the document, so you'll be able to listen to this in your own time, so you go back over it. And the other one I want you to listen to is the actual female voice. You can hear this reverberating sound, quite angelic, haunting, and that was done through a metal pipe. So let's have a listen. This is Johnny Remember Me. Okay, so that's Johnny Remember Me, smashed into number 1. And it's the first number 1 hit as a full-blown independent. So what you may or may not hear the overdub. So what you're going to hear now is the original recording, but with the word dies, it's in there. Now, that section, the volume's been lifted, so you can clearly hear it. That's how it was sounded before the BBC banned it, and then the actual overdub then with the word lost. So have a quick listen. Okay, so I'm all in for censorship, but BBC could get silly at times, really could. And this did nothing but infuriated Joe Meek when he's consistently having a battle with different record companies that had high degrees of jealousy towards anyone that was independent in the music world. They just preferred him not to be there. Now what you're going to listen to is an unusual one. Now, the myth and legend says that Joe Meek went to a cemetery and recorded the talking cat. Now, the truth of this one is it's not a cemetery at all. It was actually recorded at a known haunted farmhouse in Warley Lee Farm near Brentwood, Essex. And it was done on the night of the 31st of August, 1966, incidentally about 5 months before Joe Meek died. Now, I can be so accurate with that is because I've been in communication with the guy who's got the original tape, and that's what it's written on it. Known haunted farmhouse. So it was never done at a cemetery. Now, the reason why people thought it was a cemetery is because of the Channel 4 documentary that suggested that's where it was done, because they had a particular remake that they wanted to show Joe Meek as a complete raving mad. So what you're going to hear now is Tony Grinham. Now, this was recorded, Joe Meek in 1963 had been fined £15 for approaching a guy in a set of puppet loos, quite well known about. It was in the media, and got fined £15 for the benefit of that. He became a little bit concerned about going onto the streets on his own, becoming under attack. So he used to take the odd guy who went along with him just really for backup, and Tony Grinham was one of them. So this is Tony's story, but he was asked to do this actually in the cemetery, not the place where the recording was done. You will also hear the actual recording, the audio of what Joe Meek did that night when he went into the farmhouse. So here we go.
We used to come to locations like this, in this particular graveyard. One reason was that Joe wanted to capture sounds like he used on Screaming Lord Sutch's record till the following night. And the other reason was that he hoped to capture sounds of the supernatural, people from the other side. And one time we came across this cat, and it seemed to talk in half-human tones. He recorded that on his portable tape recorder, and we've still got that for posterity.
Okay, quick question for CJ. I just noticed the time's coming up to 8:30. I've got about another 25, 30 minutes to go. Is that going to be okay?
Yeah, please just carry on. We'll keep recording, and if people have to drop out, they'll have to leave us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay. Right, so on that one, what Tony Grinn's actually saying in the beginning is it's places like this, not this is where they got the so-called talking cat recording. He's also saying it's far from the first time that they've been out recording anyway. Now, this is my own thoughts on this, is that Joe Meek heard a voice, which is on the tape, and the only thing they could see was a cat. Did he actually presume that it was just a cat and not a disembodied voice? I've no idea. And the problem with this documentary, it pushed from the outset that Joel Meek was raving mad. It was never a factually based documentary anyway. That was their remit. So had they told the truth, it was actually done at the Essex farmhouse, not at the cemetery. Now we get on to CJ's favourite bit. The band here is the Outlaws, which is now been renamed the Tornadoes, and the round ball thing on the right there is the first American satellite, Telstar. So what Joel Meek, big fan of outer space, we need this to do something. And the tune that Chaz Hodges had to decipher, that Joel Meek was actually humming, was in fact Telstar. That was the start of it. This is the Tornadoes now. George Bellamy. This guy here, Clem Catini, a bit of music trivia. He's played on more #1 hits than anyone on the planet, 42. Incredible. Some say 44, but the minimum number is 42. John Meek himself, Arnold Caddy, and Heinz Burt there. This fella is Roger Laverne. He's just, in a way, he replaced Jeff Goddard on the keyboards. Telstar was actually played on this device called a Clever Line. Recorded is the first sort of synthesizer. And the reason why I put the stylophone on there, I think anyone around in the 70s must have had a stylophone. Quite sure I've got memories of this, using this pencil, this absolutely dreadful sounding thing. That's what the Clever Line sounds like, no different to a stylophone. How on earth Joel Meek was able to get it to sound like he did was breathtaking. So let's have a listen to it. Okay. Now, Joel Meek was a master at getting effects. He wanted a particular sound, and how could he get it? He did it with, as we spoke about before. With Telstar, the intro, he needed rocket sounds because it's rockety sounding Telstar into outer space. But how could he achieve it? Now, because they're not pre-warned you what it is, what you would have heard before would sound like rocket sounds. It's actually a toilet flushing, which has been sampled, recorded, played backwards, the tempo changed or speeded up, slowed down, chopped about, and just spliced together. So now when I quickly play just the intro bit, what you're actually hearing, and you'll hear it now, because like I say, sound isn't always what you think it is. Now I've told you what it is. You will now start to hear a toilet flushing. So next time you hear it in your car, you'll be able to tell your mates all about it. So there you go, the flushing toilet. Hopefully I've not spoilt your bubble too much with that one. Or you enjoy me next time you listen to it. So we know we use the sample toilet for get the intro rocket sounds. It was the first #1 in both UK, USA, plus a host of other European countries. Made approximately around about £3 million in current money, but Joel Meek would never live to see the benefit of that, unfortunately. French composer Jean Leroux accused Joel Meek of plagiarism, in other ways stealing his ideas. What I've actually done is on the document, I've put that track of John Leo, who's suggesting that Telstar was ripped off, and you can listen to it yourself. They're completely different, and rightfully, it was resolved in John Meek's favour in 1967, 3 weeks after he died. Took 5 years, so such a shame. And we're now into 1964. The band is the Honeycombs. The centre is a fantastic drummer named Honey Lantry. And they had a #1 hit by called Have I the Right? He was marketed with a female drummer, but Honey Lantry was a very good, well sought after drummer in the 60s. And to achieve a typical, what you call 4/4 beats, and all that means is it's 4 beats per bar, so it's 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4. He did something unusual, but I'll come to that in a second. Like, we have a quick listen to the Honeycombs and Have I the Right? Okay, so music's evolving now. We're into 64, and a couple of years' time, the Rolling Stones will follow. And to get this 4/4 beat, what he's after is 1 2 3 4. Can't get that with set acoustic drums, because as I said before, said many times, music sound is not what you think it is. So to achieve this, what he actually did, he got the band on the actual staircase and just simply left foot 1 2 3 4, right foot 1 2 3 4, and back again 1 to the other, 1 to the other. So when I quickly flick back again, now I've told you it's feet stamping 4 4 4. You will now be able to hear it now. Okay, so that's Have I the Right? Stamping feet on stairways. So I've included this really out of interest, so hopefully you've enjoyed that side of it. And now we're going to go to this fella, when John Meek met Jack the Ripper. Anyone over 40 will remember Lord Such, David Such. He famously went up against Margaret Thatcher in a general election, of all things. Proper British eccentric character, and at the moment we'll be short of them. What John Meek wanted to do is bring out a horror sort of single, and he was mates of David Such, now to become Lord Such, and in the guise of screaming Lord Such with Jack the Ripper, a number called Jack the Ripper. Obviously spent an absolute fortune on stage props, and this isn't an axe, it's a simple plywood with silver foil attached to it. But this is a proper typical character with David Such. So let's have a quick listen to Lord Such and Jack the Ripper. And I can understand why the girls thought he was a little bit scary. Down his Okay, so what Joe Meek was after is what the rock and roll hit turned to David Such. The problem is that the BBC quickly banned it. Now, in view of last week's horrific murder of the MP, I thought about dropping this out of this talk, but decided, well, I'd done it months ago, and I'm not being insensitive. So, if I come across that way, I can only apologise for that, because it's certainly not been meant in that way. So anyway, with it getting banned by the BBC, furious Joe Meek plays 2 loudspeakers on his car roof in temper, travel around the London streets, playing on a Sunday, playing Jack the Ripper at full volume, while screaming Lord Such run about the pavement, chasing anyone out with imitation carving knife. So you would have thought that had gone against him. Loads of bad publicity, but it got to equivalent of number 5, because with it being banned, it simply doesn't go in the figures. But the shop certainly sold out very, very quickly. That's the thing about when you start to ban stuff. you just end up being more popular and successful. And a bit of an epitaph on before we leave him is, this is off one of the musicians that worked with him for many years. Every gig was an adventure. I mean, getting to the gig was an adventure. Such was stop the van in some little town, take out his axe, not a real one, but it looked real, and run about and chase a bass player around the local walrus. And sadly, he died by his own hand in 1999. So, and a character was lost. So tragic. So, and a quick pub question. We've got 5 seconds to answer this one. He was a lead guitarist on Jack the Ripper. Anyone going to have a guess at that one? No? Good friend, Richard Blackmore. Around 1964, might be a little bit early. It's difficult to get a time frame on that, the people that were involved with it back then. It was that John Meek got this idea in his head that somebody had bugged his studio. So what actually happened is he starts leaving handwritten signs on the walls and will put fingers to lips if he started to talk about any current or future project. And people first arrived to the studio would be told exactly the same. On at least 2 occasions, so the band members had to strip the studio down looking for hidden microphones. Nothing was ever found. And how on earth someone could hide any recording device in that studio with Joe Meek living and working there? It's never been explained. It just didn't happen. I think you may have your own opinions on why he was thinking that the studio was bugged, which we can hopefully talk about at the end. And this is a typical example of Joe Meek and his temper. Larry Pounds phones Joe Meek up and tells Joe, "I know all your secrets, Joe." Bang, another smash phone. And Joe Meek could really never get his head around the fact that he was just simply winding him up. Just didn't have the temperament for it. I'll mention this one because it did occur, and again just covers the period of time that the people were living in. I'll read back I'll read this through. Mitch Mitchell, later to play with Jimi Hendrix, was drafted in on drums on a session. Mitch played like his life depended on it, but he was too wild for Joe Meek. So Mitch didn't get the message. So John stomped around in temper until finally he came out of the control room with a shotgun with a promise: if you don't do it properly, I'm going to blow your effing head off. Now, Mitch looked a couple of years ago when he died, refuted it ever happened. But I've spoken to 2 people who were there at the time, and both said, yes, it did happen, because Mitch Mitchell, because he wet his pants, was anyone holding a bloody shotgun at you is going to be fearful. And when that's the reason why I wanted to dispel the story. So it's probably moved into myth and legend, but this again just adds to the persona of who was Joe Meek. Now, this is quite a rare interview now, because I can only think of 3 occasions when Joe Meek went in front of a camera. And on this one, this was done in 1964, just a short clip. You can tell in his frustration in his voice the problems that he's getting with the bigger recording studios. So have a listen.
One man who tried to compete with the giants like Sir Joseph was Joe Meek, songwriter and creator of the hit record Telstar, one of the biggest pop sellers of all time. He started up his own company.
This was a complete unit to produce and press the records. And the 3rd record turned out to be a hit. It was Angela Jones by Michael Cox. But this brought on a lot of difficulties because the major record companies decided that they didn't want small operatives, and so they did their best to squash us out of the shops.
Joe Meek now produces recording tapes only, leaving the big record companies to make and distribute his records. But even here, he has his problems.
Again, I met with a lot of difficulties because I kept coming up with hits, and the A&R men and different people tied to these major companies were inclined to be a little bit envious and complained about the plugs my records were getting. And so I have to watch these people like a hawk.
Quite a telling interview. And then we have the day that Phil Spector, the guy that I mentioned earlier, telephoned Joe Meek. So the guy it's been interviewed here is Clem Catini. He's the actual session drummer from the Tornadoes. Clem actually picked the phone up to Phil Spector.
Convinced that other producers were stealing his ideas.
Yeah, the phone rang and Joe said, "We go downstairs and answer the phone." I said, "Okay." "Yes, hello." I said, "Is Mr. Meek there?" I said, "Yeah, could I ask you who's calling, please?" He said, "It's Phil Spector." I went, "Oh, Christ." When I said, "Joe, Phil Spector's on the phone." He went, "Oh, is he?" Next round down, I said, "No," ranting and raving and telling me he was a this and that and he was a thief and all that. And all of a sudden, it bang, and he's actually smashed the phone, putting it down. "You stole all my ideas." But that was Joe.
Okay, so I'm quite sure at this point now you built up your own picture of what Joe Meek is as an individual. He's recording genius. There's no question musically. He's absolutely top drawer. There's been nobody to replace him really. And the other side is he's obviously been recording EVPs, what we want to call it, from very early on, from the teenage years. He's moved into seances. He's got to have been involved with the occult side because of the issue with the Bible and the Mortis Key. And then likewise with the premonition, all very strange, attending seances and so on. So we're now on the fateful day of 3rd of February, 1967. And it's exactly 8 years to the day since Buddy Holly died. Now, with this one, I thought about just simply reading the statement, because what I managed to get is the actual interview by Patrick Pink. He was there present that day when it all happened, and he was really the only witness to what then occurred. So I thought, well, it may be better you just hear it from his own mouth, really. So if you're a little bit weary about listening to something, it's not graphic, obviously, and it's nothing like that. But if you get concerned over somebody relaying what was quite an horrific murder, just turn your volume down while you have a listen to this. This is Patrick Pink at the bottom. We'll come back to him shortly. This is Violet Shenton, who owns the leather shop there.
Joe had decided, with Hines out of the way, there was X amount of tracks that needed to be voiced over, and I started work on them that afternoon and that evening. He started coming out and shouting at me. They're listening to me through the wall. Then he started writing down notes saying, "Mime to your own song, just mime, just mime." I ended up miming to my own song for about 1 hour or so in the evening before I said, "I've had enough, Joe." Joe carried on working. When I woke early in the morning, I could still hear the tapes rolling upstairs. I shouted up the stairs, "Joe, come and get your breakfast, come and get your toast and coffee." He sat down with me, he ate one slice of toast, drank some of the coffee, wrote a note saying they're still listening to me. And I said to Joe, "Do you want me to call the doctor?" And I took my life in my hands actually saying that, because, and he shouted, "No, I don't need no doctor." Well, Joe was up in the studio, tapes were playing loud, and he put his head over the banister and shouted, "Tell Mrs. Shenton to come up and see me." About 5 minutes later, Mrs. Shenton came up. She came over to me just outside the office, and she said, "Is he in a bad mood again?" I said, "Yeah, be careful." She said, "Oh, okay, I'll come up and sort it out, don't worry, you'll be all right." And with that, she went up the stairs. I went back into the office, sat down at the desk, and all of a sudden, I've rushed to my feet. Literally, as I've gone out into the corridor, Mrs. Shenton's tumbling down the stairs, I literally caught her in my arms, and she's landed on the floor with me. As she did, she sort of turned over, and I could see that there was damage to her back with loads of smoke coming out. My first reaction was to shout to Joe, who was watching from the landing upstairs, "She's dead." And he looked at me stony-faced with a gun in his hand, and I tried to make my way up the stairs to Joe, but I never made it that far. I only made it about halfway up the stairs, if that, when Joe had reloaded and took his own head off. By the time I'd actually sort of looked over the top of the banister, I could see the obvious. Joe had killed himself. The first two policemen that walked in actually joked about it. The first one sort of looked at the bodies and said, "Come and have a look and see what a shotgun can do." You know, and they were joking about it, you know. I mean, from my perspective, you know, you don't need that, do you, you know? And they were looking at me and telling me to stay where I was, "Stay there, son, stay there." And then the detectives arrived about 2 minutes later. And one came in and started asking me what happened, who were they, etc., etc. I was arrested in the first place and taken down for my own safety. When they took me out, there was 50, 60 people out there shouting, "Murderer, murderer," you know, and they knew nothing had gone on inside. It affected me really, really bad. I mean, it literally took me years to recover from it. It took me initially 2 years just to get over what had happened, and my nerves were on end for a long, long time. And literally, I was a different person for quite a long time.
Quite a disturbing tape to listen to. Oh, it's not affected anybody with that, but I thought it's best coming from his own. Actually, got a good idea of the unfortunate situation that poor Patrick Pink found himself in. The fallout from this one, as you can imagine, was huge. What tends to happen with music studios is very much, in a way, similar to the military. When there's some major trauma that occurs, the inner circle closes ranks, and you've got the outer circle, the media, the fans, and so on the outer side. So the inner circle closes ranks. So what you're left there is myths, legends, and tittle-tattle. But the most uncomfortable part, obviously, is the killing of Violet Shenton. She was a friend of Joe Meek. She was, okay, she's a landlady, but they had a comparatively good relationship. He confided in her. In turn, she met Arlen Major start of the day. And to this day, no one understands why he killed her. Violet Shenton was also a wife and a mother. I think everybody is sympathetic to anyone that's so far down that dark road that takes their own life. It happens, but to kill Margaret Shenton with, no. So let's pick out some of the myths that then happened. I mentioned earlier that in '63, Meek had got picked up by police for cottaging. Absolutely true. It definitely happened. The story was covered in the press. Absolutely true. From then on, everything started to go wrong. No, it didn't. The reason for that is he got caught in 1963. In '64, you actually heard Joe Meek speaking to the BBC. Oh, his frustration. He didn't look that bothered. And the reason why he wasn't bothered is that because although I've had a pop at the music industry, to its credit, one thing it's never been is either homophobic or racist. And it's always been that way, to its credit. This is the reason why high numbers of different sexualities, creeds, nationalities work within the music, because they're comfortable there. So the worst thing that would have happened to Joe Meek, once he left the Corps, he'd have got into his studio, comfort zone, his inner circle. Everybody knew he was gay anyway. Put his arm around him, been sympathetic. Everyone knew what was going on within there, so they weren't surprised by it. So I don't buy this one, that he was somehow affected by the fine. The other one that came to light from the Appreciation Society was that he was being blackmailed and had financial problems. His records had come to an end. And the other strange one that they came up with is that the Craze was in some way involved. We know Ronnie Craig was gay and was demanded to take over the management of Tornadoes. And Joe told him to do one, which Joe Meek would have done. And what he's saying, that's not really the thing you can do, the Craze. No one within the studio has any recollection of this at all. And I knew what the answer would be after, that the music industry was more than capable of looking after itself. So the Craze getting involved, trying to do some sort of extortion racket on the studio would have come seriously unstuck, because they would have bitten off more that they can chew. So I don't buy this one. And there's no evidence anywhere to suggest that the Craze was in any way involved with blackmailing or extortion with Joe Meek. However, Bernard Oliver, now a farmer on the return to his farm, spotted 2 suitcases at the side of the road, opened one of them, to his horror found dismembered body parts of a young 17-year-old male by the name of Bernard Oliver. Now, unusual for this one was that whoever cut up the corpse had manicured his fingernails and groomed his hair, and he was also sexually assaulted. The reason why the police considered a gay angle, and the suggestion being that they were going to interview every gay in London. Well, I can understand up to a point that Joe Meek might have been a little bit fearful about being interviewed with regard to this one, because when he got caught cottaging in 1963, he generally felt he'd been set up by the police, quite possible. But as far as this one with Bernard Oliver, certainly nothing on the police murder inquiry pointed towards Joe Meek. So I'm not entirely sure why it is that people feel this is what took Joe Meek over the edge. I don't know. It's almost in the realms of the myths and legends, and nobody's ever caught for this horrific, awful murder of this young man. Awful. Heinz Burt. Now, this guy, he came into the Joe Meek's life around 1962. Excuse me. He was considered talentless by the studio musicians. Clem Catini often said that the only time his bass was in time is when he wasn't playing it. And Joe Meek made 2 major errors. The first one was to fall in love with Heinz Burt, and the other one was not to change his name, because in a pre-Second World War, having a German name in the UK at a gig, the band are not going to say anything, but the spectators certainly would do. And unfortunately, Heinz Burt did get abused by spectators. They threw Heinz beans at him because of a connection with the name and so on and so forth. He had a minor hit with a number called Just Like Eddie. That was sort of Eddie Cochran after he died, a bit of a tribute to him. He was self-styled by Joe Meek, including his blonde hair. He was accepted as Joe Meek's lover despite Heinz Burt's own denial, and he bolted once it started to dry up. The shotgun that used on Violet Shenton and on Joe Meek was actually owned by Heinz Burt. Heinz Burt himself was arrested for several hours and was the #1 suspect for a period of time before being released. And why I particularly dislike Heinz Burt, personally dislike him, is because he never stood by the name of Joe Meek, considering he was his lover, so everyone else did, but Heinz Burt never did. Then we come to the old fateful one of money, or the lack of it. Unusually, Joe Meek died on the 3rd of February. Within 7 weeks, the probate had been granted, around about £27,000 in today's money. The Telstar royalties released around about £3 million at that point then. in today's money, was said to have gone off debts. And despite plenty searching, I've not been able to find any paper trail what actually happened to that money. So this just cements my own belief of corruption, money, and the music industry. I may well be wrong with that, but it just seems to be a bit dodgy at best. But what Joe Meek did leave behind is legacy with a faithful, what they call the T-chest tapes. There's around about 10,000 tapes that were found, put into T-chest, the reason why they call it T-chest tapes. There were 4 tracks and single track tapes that were found in various rooms. Some had nothing on, some had some on. The vultures there after the audio, but there were some that appeared to have no sound in them at all. And I know exactly how you're thinking. So we'll see how this one progresses, but some information has been found within the tape, including the one of the talking cat, where it's actually written on there regarding the where it was taken. We know we went to Highgate Cemetery. That's one tape that's present, and as well, strangely, to Holloway Prison of all places. This is Holloway was famous for the execution of Ruth Ellis, the last female to be executed in Britain. I can't prove without question that it was the suicide cell that they actually went there to record the walls from. But people that staff around that time say the only cell that was unoccupied around that period of time was in fact the execution cell. So he went there for a reason, likewise with Highgate Cemetery and the other places that he went to. So I'm still having discussions with a guy who's got a number of these tapes, and I'm just wondering what other secrets are there to be found, because a lot of the audio has now been screened from it now, and they're just left with whatever tapes have been left, because a number of them, the brothers took about a dozen boxes over as part of his memory, and they simply left them because of poor storage in the garage. They ended up getting destroyed, which is a shame. So I'll keep you posted on that one. So overall, the conclusions, what we've got, the actual inquest into Joe Meek didn't have an open verdict. It actually said it was a suicide following the murder of Violet Shenton. Some drugs were found in his system, some amphetamines in particular, but not in large quantities. And the pathologists at the time were suggesting that they were just simply not sure if that may had an effect with him at all. But he had been on drugs since about 1958. This is 1967, 9 years after. So it's not like a recent thing, unless he did, in fact, just simply just took too many. 3 days before he murdered Shenton and killed himself, he actually got a passport, went for a passport photograph session because he was booking a holiday to Egypt. It doesn't suggest the workings of a man about to take his own life, but maybe something dramatic occurred within that 3 days following it. Certainly, in the case of young Bernard Oliver, he was buried 4 days after Joe Meek was killed himself. The evening of the 2nd of February was an interesting one. This is the night before. Margaret Blackmore, she was the wife of the rock guitarist Richie Blackmore. Now, what Joe Meek had actually done, he'd rented like an apartment a few blocks away from Holloway Road, really just for where other musicians could stay and had to come to record. But it was actually in the end rented to Richie Blackmore, and his then wife, Margaret Blackmore, came to visit. Now, what she describes is something quite strange. I didn't have time to write it out today. But what she said, when she arrived there, Joe Meek was dressed completely in black, nothing but black. When she went in there, which she'd done many, many times, when Richie Blackmore was away on tour, big friend of John Meek, go around, see, talk to him, see how he's doing. Said he was behaving quite strangely, and suggested, let me just grab the name for you. What she was actually suggesting, what John Meek was suggesting, that she looked like the wife of Alistair Crowley. I thought that was a strange comment for John Meek to mention. And this is the last person to have any form of contact with John Meek before he killed himself and murdered Violet Shenton, except for Patrick Pink, obviously, the following morning. John Meek had a total conviction of the Bully Holly premonition, firmly believed that he was giving spiritual guidance for the premonition. He was also heavily involved with a psychic medium by the name of Mrs. Smith and her spirit guides. And she had actually said to John Meek that leading up to the 3rd of February, that he was not in a good place, suggesting that something was going to happen to him. And he spoke about this quite openly in the studio, to the point where he said he was having the experience was so bad at the seance table, he was hearing voices which were keeping him awake thereafter. As far as moving on from there, what I've done is 304 Holloway Road is still in time warp condition. It was after John Meek's demise. It was owned then by Lloyd's Bank. They had the shop next door, and they simply had it and just rented it out periodically. Up to 2018, it's still in time warp condition, with the exception of a kitchen that's been in place. People that have been living there have indicated no activity whatsoever. But on discussions with One Market Square in Newark, where John Meek was brought up and spent all his childhood, they actually experiencing strange phenomena, including the current occupiers, with the reporting loud thumps outside John Meek's bedroom. It's old Joe wandering about, says the older lady of the house. And her husband said, even though he's a skeptic, said he numerously hears bangs and walking up the upstairs. And when he opened the door, there's nobody there. So who knows? There's an actual blue plaque on the address now, which has been placed there a couple of years ago. And we're getting really now to the end of the story. And this is a date you're familiar with, 3rd of February. We've had it 1959, Buddy Holly died. 1967, Michael Shenton, Violet Shenton and John Meek died. 2003, the same date, 3rd of February. But on the 3rd of February, Phil Spector, he's back again, murdered his girlfriend and actress Lana Clarkson by shooting her in the mouth while at his mansion. 36 years to the day after John Meek and Michael Shenton died, 44 years to the day since Buddy Holly died. John Meek and Lana Clarkson both shared the same birthday, the 5th of April. Both were shot in the mouth. Both died on the same date. And Spector died in prison on the 16th of January of this year. So I'm not saying it's anything more than coincidence, but it's an interesting one all the same. And that's the end of the story. Whew. 9:10.
Tony, thank you so much for an amazing talk. It's pretty nice.
Do I press stop sharing?
Yeah, you can do if you wish. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really sorry that if it's gone on for too long there.
I was